Authorities in Hong Kong believe hamsters at a pet shop infected a worker there with the Delta variant of COVID-19. Now, in recent years, there has been quite a bit of media coverage of zoonotic diseases. And for more on this matter, I have Dr. Kim Seung-taek from Institute Pasteur Korea. Dr. Kim, welcome back.
Good afternoon.
I also have Dr. Keith Hamilton at the World Organization for Animal Health live on the line. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Dr. Hamilton.
Good afternoon, Sunny. Thank you.
Right, Dr. Kim, we'll start here. Let's begin then with a few words on the possible route of Delta transmission from hamsters to the pet shop worker.
Well, according to the reports from the Hong Kong, that actually there had been no the cases of Delta infection for the last 3 months. So then they were just very keenly just interested in this case, and the report said the employee of this pet shop was infected, and then the potential route of transmission is from the hamsters. And then for the transmission, although the COVID-19 is an airborne disease, but we do not know about exactly how the transmission occurs among the animals. Sometimes, by depending on maybe can be actually the respiratory route. Sometimes can be actually transmitted by just the contact. But anyway, I mean the government actually sort of trace back to the some transmission route from the hamster to the human, and then these hamsters seem to be imported from the countries in some countries from the Europe right now.
Right. And Dr. Hamilton, how does your entity perceive the risk of COVID-19 transmission from animals to human beings?
Right. Well, first I'd like to say that a broad range of animal species appear to be susceptible to COVID-19 virus infection. But most infections in the field have certainly happened from contact with humans. So most infections have been from humans to animals rather than the other way around. There isn't much evidence of infection of humans by the animals themselves, but this is a potential risk. The two things we would be concerned about in terms of public health risk in relation to animal infections is for animals to become a reservoir of COVID-19 virus that might spill back into humans. And the other risk is for the virus to be introduced to animals and then for it to evolve in animals, leading to the emergence of more variants. But really, with events like this, there needs to be a thorough investigation to understand how the animals were originally infected, because, as I said, usually they're infected by humans that are infected with COVID-19, but there is potential then for some animals to pass infection to other animals that they're in close contact with. And we do know that hamsters are susceptible and that they can pass infection to other hamsters from laboratory experiments.
Right, I see. Dr. Kim, so there have been cases, like Dr. Hamilton has said, of people infecting their pets with COVID-19. Having said that, what is the risk, in your opinion, of a reversal in that trend?
Well, this transmission route is maybe this is a rare phenomenon, or just a matter of just a rare detection or the rare report. So we do not know for sure how frequently it does occur. And then, as Dr. Hamilton said, there's a chance of the viruses once infected some other animals, and then they can potential to evolve to another different kinds of the variants. And then we cannot rule out any other outcome, but sometimes it may be virulent. I mean, in terms of the human point of view, but also there's some potential to that these viruses can be very attenuated. Because what I mean attenuation is the virus is kind of adapt themselves in the new host, like this SARS-CoV-2 actually somehow adapted themselves within the humans. So then this is actually attenuation is one of the method in the past that generating attenuated vaccines with these viruses.
I see. And Dr. Hamilton, what can you share with us about the impact of COVID-19 on animals thus far, since we enter year 3 under the pandemic?
Right, so our member countries report occurrences of COVID-19 in animals to our organisation, so we're a unique source of information on animal infections. I think 35 countries have reported events in animals to us, and that spans 18 species. So we know that in the field setting, 18 different species of animal have been infected with COVID-19. And as I stressed, this has usually been through close contact with humans. And those animal species vary from tigers to snow leopards to gorilla to mink to white-tailed deer, and even a hippopotamus. The two kind of quite significant events that we've had reported to us are infections of mink on mink farms. And that was significant because mink are very, very susceptible to the virus. So when they were infected in the farm setting, infection spread very rapidly between mink. Also on these mink farms, we saw that there was potential for the virus to mutate. So there was potential for the virus to evolve and produce more variants. So that was a concern, and countries took action to control the disease on mink farms. Another very interesting event recently was in North America. A fairly high prevalence of white-tailed deer were found to be infected with the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Thankfully, those white-tailed deer didn't seem to be affected severely by the disease, and there wasn't really any evidence of mutation of the virus in white-tailed deer. But really, we don't fully understand the implications of COVID-19 virus infections in animals yet. But what we're encouraging our countries to do is to continue to monitor animal populations, to gather information so we can better assess the risks and make decisions later on. And we'll be providing guidance to our countries on how they can best target monitoring and surveillance in different animal species.
Right, which is probably the most logical approach we have at the moment then. Dr. Kim, COVID-19 has been classified as a zoonotic disease believed to have originated from bats. Now, granted, there are some pundits who claim that conclusion is premature. But how does the persistence of COVID-19 transmission within animals perhaps look to affect our own efforts to eliminate COVID-19?
That's right, and actually that's why from the earlier in the pandemic, the experts said that this COVID-19, that is SARS-CoV-2, will not be just eradicated. It will be with us probably just forever. And one of the reasons is that this virus has now just an animal reservoir, and then now just the hamsters and the minks and any other so many animals can be infected, and then within these animals the virus can just replicate. So even after, well, theoretically we can just eradicate this virus from just a human society, the viruses will just remain in the animal reservoir. So then there is some potential to the virus can just transmit from the animals to humans. So this is kind of just a limitation of this kind of a zoonotic viruses. But in contrast, some viruses actually just eradicated, can be eradicated. For example, like smallpox viruses, after some hundreds of years of vaccination effort, this virus was eradicated, and except for 2 laboratories in Moscow, in Russia, and then the US, just in case in the laboratory. And then now the WHO is projecting some elimination of some poliovirus, and also maybe within 10 years or so, there's a hepatitis C virus. One of the common thing among these viruses which can be actually eradicated is that it's mostly like human viruses. That there's no known report in any animal reservoir for these viruses. But if there's any animal reservoir, it's really tough to just eliminate this virus on the planet.
Right. And Dr. Kim, COVID-19 has served to raise universal awareness perhaps about the danger of zoonotic diseases. What perhaps are some other examples of such diseases, with the exception of the plague perhaps?
Well, there are actually just so many zoonotic viruses, and then approximately 60% of human infections and infections actually just accounted by the zoonotic infections. And then some of the examples, and then if I just recall it, there are the MERS and then SARS, like just the SARS-CoV-2, or just zoonotic viruses. And then severe fever with the thrombocytopenia syndrome. This is probably very popular in Korea. It's like a seasonal viral infection. This is also a zoonotic infection. This is actually the transmission mediated by just a tick biting. And then there are others like a Zika virus infection, and also Ebola, and some rabies virus infection, and the West Nile virus infection. All those are some zoonotic viruses, and then the transmission is very diverse. Some of them is actually respiratory infection, and then some infections actually just transmit by the vector, mostly some mosquitoes, and then just the ticks, and then sometimes just some others, some contact, just a transmission.
Right. And Dr. Hamilton, keeping in mind what Dr. Kim has said, how do you explain the recent rise, perhaps, in zoonotic diseases?
Right, we certainly need to develop a better understanding of the drivers for disease emergence, but we do kind of recognize and we certainly acknowledge that the likely drivers of disease emergence are deforestation, climate change, land use change, certain types of agricultural practice, illegal wildlife trade. These are generally accepted to be the drivers of disease emergence. I think it's important to note that animals and wildlife are also victims of emerging infections, and it's important not that we shouldn't blame animals. Animals are also victims of emerging disease, and the drivers of disease emergence are largely linked to human activity. So when we better understand those drivers, we might be able to take steps to reduce the risk. Certainly we can start because we have a broad understanding, so that we do know some of the things that we can do to reduce the risk of disease emergence.
Right, so largely speaking, human beings are to blame for this reality then?
Well, human activity.
Right.
It's a complex interaction of human, animal and environmental factors. That's why we talk about One Health.
Right, of course. Dr. Hamilton, quite recently, relevant authorities in the UK confirmed a case of avian influenza in a person there. Now, bird-to-human transmission of avian flu is said to be rare, I understand. What can you tell us about this recent case?
Well, you're right. Such events do occur, but they are very rare. And from what I understand, this person was infected in very close, regular contact with a large number of infected birds which were kept in and around their home. And we know that almost all cases of H5N1 infection in people have been associated with close contact with infected live or dead birds or a contaminated environment. We have about 20 years of data of H5N1 events in humans, so we can look back and look at these past cases as well.
And Dr. Kim, what can you share with us about the potential transmission of avian influenza from perhaps one infected individual to another human being, and how fatal is this disease for us?
Well, based on the some prior just a report about this transmission of the some bird flu, its case fatality sometimes can be up to like a 60%. So it's quite just a fatal. But then many experts are actually concerned about the potentially later some human-to-human transmission. But as Dr. Just Hamilton said, this has not been very just well. It seems to be pretty just a rare event so far.
Right, I see. Dr. Hamilton, I believe your entity has raised the alarm on the growing risk of avian influenza among people then. Could you perhaps explain this stance by the World Organization for Animal Health?
Of course. So first, it's important to say that this is a disease of birds. That's why it's called avian influenza, avian being birds. So infections in birds are relatively common, but infections in humans, as we've said, are rare and sporadic. But in birds, it can have a devastating impact. Some strains, known as highly pathogenic avian influenza strains, cause very, very severe disease, which can kill entire flocks of birds. So this causes devastating losses for the farming sector. This year, we've seen unprecedented number of outbreaks of avian influenza in birds, which is hitting the poultry industry very hard in many countries. We're also seeing that avian influenza is having a significant impact on wild bird populations, and this could be a real threat to endangered species. This year, we're not sure why we're seeing this unusual situation this year. It really is unprecedented. And again, it's likely to be due to that complex interaction between environmental factors, viral factors, and bird population dynamics of birds. But it could well be linked to some environmental changes which are affecting the habitats of wild birds or their migratory patterns. So that's something that we need to further investigate.
Right. And Dr. Kim, staying with what Dr. Hamilton has said, how do you explain the emergence of zoonotic diseases in recent years, and what are the implications of this phenomenon on efforts to perhaps ensure public health?
Well, Dr. Hamilton actually mentioned about this in a moment ago, and then I want just to re-emphasize that well, just the growing, just the global population, and then just the climate change, somehow just well intensifying the human activity, and then this human activity is actually just destroying some wildlife, just a reservoir, and the main just activity is probably including some deforestation, and then some urbanization, and then building cities, and then roads, and then this activity somehow now just increasing just chances of just human, just between the human and then some other some zoonotic, some unknown just pathogen. So this pathogen was somehow just existed in some other just animal reservoirs, maybe some in some very deep forest, but now just the people are just developing and then deforesting, and then there are more chances of just contacting between just humans and then animals. So that's the main reason. And then also now just we have air travel. Sometimes one just epidemic outbreak that actually just a disease can easily just transmit it to someone in some other total just a different continent, whether it is a respiratory disease or contact transmission and others. Yeah.
Right. Dr. Hamilton, do you suppose our efforts to ensure a green world then perhaps will serve to prevent future pandemics?
Well, yes, and I think that's the idea of One Health, really. Like One Health in a nutshell is about multi-sectoral cooperation towards the common goals of protecting human health, animal health, and the environment. So I think over the years we've learned that there are no simple siloed solutions to things. We really need to work across sectors and develop holistic solutions. And I think this kind of adoption of systems-based thinking, where we think about things as complex systems rather than very rational siloed systems, it is going to help us enormously in our future efforts to maintain the health of humans, animals, and the environment.
Right. All right, Dr. Hamilton, thank you very much for your insight today. Dr. Kim here in the studio, thank you for your thoughts and your time.